What is happening, people? Today we have Nancy Conrad, the owner of Vineyard Funding Capital. She got started heavily investing in notes and real estate back in 2008, 2009, shortly after the market crashed. She kind of went full head in and invested the majority of her money in real estate, but still doing quite a few deals in the note investing space. We're going to talk about why creativity is key. Nancy talks about some amazing strategies that I didn't even know about until I spoke with her for note investing and how to get creative to have multiple different exits and multiple different ways to create notes and or use notes to your advantage. So super great show. We're also going to talk about the calculator that every single note investor needs to have installed on their phone, their computer, laptop, what have you, to analyze deals. Also going to talk about self-directed IRAs, quite a few different topics that is going to be sure to open your ears and open your eyes to some of the different strategies and unique strategies that Nancy uses in her business, and I'm sure everyone will be implementing after listening to her. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Name of your business is what? Vineyard Funding Capital. That's a unique name. How did you get that name?
A couple of reasons. First of all, my where I live is close to a street named Vineyard.
There you go.
So, but also that whole concept of a vineyard is when I was younger, I was a reporter, and one of the most fun stories I ever got to do was to write about all the vineyards in the area where I was working, and there were probably about 10 of them or something like that. So I was doing like a piece on each of them. And so I got to go to all these different vineyards, and I really didn't realize until I did that, it takes a long time from the point of time where you're growing grapes, and then you have to monitor them and make sure that you're not losing your investment and make sure that the animals don't eat them. You've got to keep birds away from them. And then also, what are the right kinds of grapes for you? I mean, it goes on and on. Do you package them or do you grow them and then package it from beginning to end? Or some people just grow the grapes, sell them wholesale to another person that makes the wine. And notes is so much like that, because there's this whole variety of thing that you could do in the notes business. You could do it from beginning to end. You're starting the notes, you're creating them, you're selling the property. And then you go out to, all the different variations of what you can do, or you just stay in a very small niche for notes. Also, the fact that vineyards take a long time to grow and really flourish. So that was long story, but
Hey,
that's the
no,
reason
that
why.
makes sense. I didn't know vineyards were that, I never didn't know too much about vineyards. We don't have too many out here in the Midwest, but that makes a lot of sense, like the snowball effect of investing and like you said, note investing is a very creative space,
It
so
really is. It
but
really is.
but yeah, let's talk about something like your success. I mean, I think you've been in this business, I think based off your resume I was reading, it's like since 2005, I think. So, you've been around the block, I could imagine, or
Yeah, I was thinking about that today. Actually, about that time, I was getting into real estate and doing it the usual way, which is, maybe you start in lease options or something like that. Or, I was just trying to build up so that we could get property bought and so on. And I was in California at the time. And I remember running into this guy's material. Yeah, I look back at it now and it was really awful. But it was a guy named, I don't know, his name was Russ Dalby. And he did a bunch of like commercials. You ever heard of this guy?
no, no.
Okay. So I think he was in Utah, and I don't know if he's still around or anything, but he was teaching people about notes. But he had this very slim amount of education that he got to people. But the concept of notes was really interesting to me, because it's all about that passive income. I mean, because how if you scale up in the real estate industry, you're going to be, if you're doing a job, you're taking on another job, basically.
Sure.
And with notes, not so much. And also I like the fact, and in 2005, it became more important in, say, 2008, 2009, when the real estate market started falling apart, and also the stock market plunged. And at that point in time, I had just, we had rehabbed a house in California. It took a monstrous amount of time, and I should have sold it way sooner, but the market was so hopping in California, and prices were rising through the roof, that it was like, oh, I'll just hang on to it. And then they started crashing. And I had to come up with another way to get at it. Luckily, I didn't lose the house that we were working on, but I had it for a long time. And that education, knowing a little bit about notes, we ended up wrapping the deal on that. I took it back because that person failed. Eventually, we sold the house, but it took a long time.
Sure.
But it was a few years later that I was at a seminar. I didn't really get into notes until much later. Then we were only kind of dabbling in it. I was at something in Irvine, California, that Equity Trust, the IRA custodian, had put on. And it was like a 3-day weekend thing about, how to really pump some life into your self-directed IRA. And at that point, because the market had fallen apart, I pulled all of money out of like my IRA out of the stock market, and it was battered. And I know a lot of people said, don't sell. And I'm like, oh, dang it, I'm selling. I'm out.
Right.
And we put those meager bits into a self-directed IRA, and we started buying cheap houses because they were super cheap then. The first one I got in California was like 113,000, and it was a new house in a gated community with a community pool.
What part
palm
of
trees.
California, for California prices, that's like unbelievable, right?
Unbelievable. Well, it was in the Coachella Valley, which is, where the concert Coachella is. It was nearby there.
Okay.
And near Palm Springs and everything. And it's a nice area. It was less expensive because there's fewer jobs out there, and so the market would, always kind of reflect that.
Sure.
But we bought that and did really well on it. And then we started buying stuff in Arizona for rentals. And I thought, okay, fine, I'm just going to do rentals then. But back to Irvine. So I go to this event, I think it was 2016, maybe 15. And one of the speakers there was Eddie Speed. And I don't know if you've heard of Eddie Speed or of Eddie Speed. He has
I've heard of Eddie Speed, yeah.
An organization, Colonial Funding, I think, is probably one of the entities that they operate under. He has
Right.
Note School, and he talked about putting notes in your IRA. And I was like, that just blew up my head. I'm like, oh, there's that Russ Dalby thing again. But Eddie Speed he's really a good teacher.
Yeah.
And we forked over some money to take his course. I didn't, it was a good course. It was like 3 weekends or something like that over a period of time. Like you go for a 3-day weekend in 1 month, and then maybe 2 or 3 months later, we'd go to another one. And he had them in different cities, and we'd fly out to those things and go. And I just learned a boatload of stuff. At that point, his group wants to sign up and wants to sign you up and mentor people. I didn't need that. I didn't go for that. And I talked to them about it, and they were really nice people. I'm like, I think I can just go do this. And apparently the guy told me, most people don't. If they walk away and they don't sign up for mentoring, they never do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Sure.
And I took that as a personal challenge. Like, dang it, I'm going to do it. So
it's over now, right?
Yeah, I'm in, and you can't stop me. So I just went forward and started getting into notes. First ones we bought actually were from Eddie Speed's group, and we started with non-performers, super cheap, not a big buy-in. Like you could take, and these were all self-directed IRA things. So
Right.
I think the first one I bought, I don't know, maybe I bought like 3 to start with. It was a couple in Wisconsin, which I had some comfort level with. I grew up in Illinois and my mom's folks were from Wisconsin. I'm like, hey, if I got to take it back, there are worse places than to go, but to Wisconsin, I go spend some time out there and fix it up.
Right. Right.
And at this point I was working for myself anyway, so I didn't have to be tied to an office job. And that would allow me the freedom to do that. So I bought some of those. In fact, I still have one of those. I took it back as a non-performer, went through the foreclosure process, learned a lot from that. So that was kind of my workshop house in terms of, what you learn from just doing one note deal.
Sure.
Is amazing. Now I know a lot of people are doing like, they'll buy a bunch of them at a time. I don't really do that. We'll buy a few,
Right.
a little, and mostly it's just like, because I have rentals too, and I'm trying to balance out rentals with notes, because I think the rentals give you a really good hedge against inflation, particularly right now, because they're just through the roof.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I kind of lost my train of thought there. I went down some avenue.
No, but we were talking about, what you're currently doing in the business. I mean, like the note investing definitely gives you that passive element of it. But you said some of the first ones you bought were non-performers, like the
Right.
cheaper ones, right?
Yeah,
Are
under
you mainly
30,000.
focusing
Yeah.
on non-performers then now, or you kind
I'm
of
not.
mixing and matching, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. It has morphed some. I'm not opposed to buying non-performers, but they're not my key. And I think that was because the market changed. So the non-performers that were showing up in 2016 were the leftovers from the debacle of the mortgage meltdown. And usually these were little houses in little towns.
Right.
Midwest was obviously featuring very strongly because their market level is just so much more affordable than a house in California. I mean, you can go, I have one on the market right now. It's like $60,000. It's a Wisconsin house. And you could go in and fix that house up. It needs fixing, but a person could have a perfectly reasonable little house to live in and live on Social Security even.
Yeah.
And do okay. But right now, I think more we've focused on kind of working with, as I've gotten to know people in the business and rehabbers and people around, we've got a lot of notes in Texas, people that are in Texas that are rehabbing houses, and they need some money to make the deal work. And
Right.
I've written notes for that. And also let's see, the last 4 note deals that I've done have been for Texas rehabbers. I'm not opposed to that. Occasionally somebody will say, hey, I got this note I really want to sell. We've picked up a few like that. Some people that buy notes thinking they're going to try them out and get rolling with them, I've found they don't always feel comfortable with them, or if somebody stops paying and then it's going from performing to sort of sub-performing to non-performing, they're like, no, I'm out. And you have to have the fortitude, that the intestinal fortitude to say, I'm okay with that. And because this is in our IRA and I don't live off of that money right now, I'm okay with that. I mean, I have a few sub-performers in there. I've gotten to know the people behind those, and I'm fairly confident that they'll stand up for the loan. And most of them, I think, when you get to know people, I actually pick up the phone and call. It's amazing what you can do, and people don't really realize how easy it is to just kind of build a relationship with somebody. Now,
Sure.
that doesn't mean that I've been taken advantage of, because there are always people that will lie.
Right, right. Well, but I think for the most part, people are mostly good, and
Mostly good. Yeah.
especially even if they're not good people, they understand you can actually take legal action against them, and they do know that. So, I think a large part of note investing, I mainly just create notes. I've never purchased a note. I've only created them. But it's the same thing when you're selling it to somebody. You have to kind of be like that big parent to be there. Like, this is how we're going to help you through this process to make sure you can afford this, and make sure you're set up for success. Because it's so creative. I mean, you can do anything you want, right? So
Yeah.
you can make sure the payments fit um, their lifestyle or down payment. You can change anything however you want to. So getting to know the person is yeah, definitely huge.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that I think has been really gratifying about this is that you feel like you're helping somebody.
Oh, you are.
Um,
Yeah.
and I when I look back and I think of some of the deals that we've done, one lady, she literally had left like an abusive home situation,
Ooh.
and she was using, hefty garbage bags for her suitcases.
Oh
And
my
she
goodness.
had she had a job, which I think she was couch surfing. Her kids were kind of grown, but I had this deal that was going to be, she could live in this house for like under $500 a month,
Yeah.
and she's like, Nancy, I'm going to make this work.
Yeah.
She stayed there for about 3 years. She did leave me with some bills at the end when she cleared out, but
Right.
you know what? I'm like, okay, I'll
But
leave
still, I mean,
that.
3 years of,
Yeah,
payments and all that. I mean, you're still,
yeah,
still pretty good. And at least she was, in a good spot for those few years, right?
yeah. There are a few things that I think, you learn over the years. You probably have too. You do it once and then there's some little hitch and you're like, okay, I'm not going to do it that way again
Right.
the
Right.
next time.
Well, it's kind of like how you mentioned the mentoring program, how they said most people don't do it if they go through this. And like how I got started is, I was mentioning to you before the call, I read Mitch Stevens' books, and Mitch Stevens has a program, and I've since taken it, but my first deal I didn't even take the program because I knew if I took the program, like I wouldn't do it, right? So I was
mm,
like, I think I can just jump in and figure it out. And to be honest with you, I did the first deal incorrectly. Like, I wouldn't do it the same way. I still made money off of it, but I wouldn't do it that way now. But you just have to learn the process. You have to just jump in, and
you
you just
do.
got to go for it, right? You can
Yeah,
always use Google. You can always call and ask people.
yeah. I mean, we have, I haven't done a ton with this, but I do have my, a group on Facebook, the Note Buyers and Sellers Club. There's a lot of people in there, and I think a lot of them are just kind of watching. And initially, I put up a bunch of informational things and some training stuff, and I've kind of let other people do that. But it is a good way to stay connected with other people, especially in the last 2 years now with COVID, where
Yeah.
travel and those big meetings, that I love going to those things and seeing people in the business and sitting down and having lunch or something like that with somebody. And then we connect, and, maybe something comes up and we can call, and that's been really helpful. And you could get so much information from those things. And even just in hallways chatting with somebody, it's been, some of those are awesome.
Sure. Sure. So let's talk about like the current, I guess, current market. Like I've been talking with a lot of people, note investors, and you know, I'll either keep my notes or I'll sell them, and I don't do a lot of deals, maybe just a few deals a year. But
Mhm.
I had one earlier this year that, I mean, it was seasoned for like 2 months, and someone went in and bought it, which is like unheard of for me. Usually people won't touch it unless it's a year or two. So, and so of course I sold it. But is it, from what I'm hearing, is hyper competitive for people who are buying notes right now. It's almost like an overinflated market. I mean, what are you seeing?
Um, Yeah, for a while, and I think this is why I went into, buying from or working with rehabbers and creating a new note, or doing this, the collateralized, one that I just did. I think that's because the market is so pumped up right now. And then when I first started, you could get a non-performing note for, you know, 35, 40 cents on the dollar, something like that. And seconds for sure. Much less than that, 10 cents on the dollar, maybe less. And I have not gotten into seconds. I would, I think in some cases, but because there's so many things that a second can give you, it gives you a position in the note. So if the first falls apart, let's say you're in California, you buy a second on a California house, you can take over the first if somebody fails to pay that, and get rid of that guy, and then you have a house in California, which is of course usually pretty high. But I digress. So the market, I think, is kind of jacked up. I think note prices are going at like 85% of note value in many cases. Sometimes they're asking more, or par. There has to be a lot of things in place to buy a note on par. I am not too keen on that. But the way to get around that, if somebody wants to sell a note and they want par for it, offer a partial, buy the first, whatever the note, let's say there's, 10 years payments, buy the first 5 years. And then tell them, when you come back to me in 5 years, and maybe I'll buy the rest then.
Right.
Your interest rate goes up that way. You just get out I suggest to anybody listening to this to go get familiarized with the 10BII calculator and know how to operate that thing. I have it like attached to me all the time. You can, get it on your phone. You can have a desktop version. I use it every day, constantly.
You said that 10VII calculator was that?
10BII.
10BII.
Yeah, there's it's a financial calculator, but it's online. So basically, you download this as an app, and it's an app on your phone or app on your desktop. And you have 4 things for the most part that you're putting into the note calculator to figure it out. You have the number of payments, you have the interest rate, you have the unpaid balance, and you have the payment itself. Now, if you want to figure out, well, what if I get, let's say you're going to buy a note and they want, 90% of that note at 7.5%. And you're like, well, I'm not going to do that. I usually get between 10 and 12% on average, kind of an aggregate. Some of them are through the roof and we're getting infinity. Some of them are like, coughing and sputtering at 8%. So I'm like, okay. But overall, this is where that's our sweet spot. I'm satisfied with that number. So if you're going to the 10BII calculator and you say, look, I don't want that 7.5%, I'm going to put in 10%. And then what you do is you click on the present value in that. And that is the amount owed, the unpaid balance. In the calculator, it says PV under it. You click on that and it'll give you the right number to get 10% on the payment. Let's say the payment is $800. I'm just throwing out a number. And you click on that PV and it'll give you a new number, take something off. That's your percentage that's the offer that you're going to make to buy that note to the borrower, or the person selling it, I'm sorry. And, they'll either take it or they're not going to take it. If they're not going to take it and you have a chance to work with them, then you can always offer them the payments of, look, let me buy a partial from you. Right, because once you buy that partial, you have the opportunity to pick up the other payments. If they need a bunch of money, you ask them, look, how much do you need? Would you be happy with, could I buy out part of that? And then you're in a great position. So those are some good ways of working around the problem of the market being kind of heated up right now.
I gotcha. So how do you source your notes? I mean, I imagine you probably use a bunch of different resources, maybe like PaperStack, Facebook, whatever. But I guess,
right.
Is that pretty much just you're always kind of scanning, looking for it, or?
It is. There are some folks out there that have them available, and I will look at those from time to time. But honestly, the ones that I end up getting the most ones where people reach out to me directly.
Right.
And we get a conversation going And because if I go to one of those websites, and those are great for, I would say for a lot of people, but you're competing with a bunch of other people.
Sure.
Okay. So when somebody calls me, I guess because I've been around a while, and says, what can I do with this note? Or sometimes they'll just chat with me and ask me about it. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind sharing a little information. If I have time, I will do it and say, here's, what you could do. And sometimes I'll offer to buy it. So that's where we get it. And we're just picking up a few notes every year. So, and that's mainly because of my goal. I'm really on the precipice of retiring pretty soon.
Okay,
Although
congrats.
I don't know that I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing, because you could do notes, until, and there are lots of people doing notes way past retirement. In
Oh, yeah.
fact, one of my favorite notes teachers, his name is Tom Henderson. He has had a class. Last one I went to was in San Antonio a couple of years ago, and he teaches. He works a lot with the 10BII calculator, and he teaches some fabulous ways to get at a note and make the most out of it. Like one example that he teaches, which is kind of an easy one to get across, but is his 10 for 12 deal. So if somebody wants to create a note and you're looking to get a good percentage, one way to do it is whether you're lending out of your self-directed IRA or out, just regular bank account or whatever, you get with the local landlords around town. And some of them have had rentals where people have been paying for a long time because of COVID. And maybe they're looking at, booting those people out, and it's expensive and time consuming. Well, you offer to say, look, I will pay you the next 12 months of what you would get for your rent, but I'm going to pay 10 months of that. So I will pay you basically a year in advance, but I'm going to only give you 10 payments, because that would help that landlord get through the difficulties of the eviction and possibly cleaning the place out. Because, usually people that haven't been paying for a long time, they have the I don't give a care attitude about how the property is kept, and it's in dismal condition when you get it back, and it takes money to fix it up. Ask me how I know. And anyway, the interest rate, if your landlord agrees to that and you get money up front, your interest rate on that 10 for 12 deal is always 35.07%.
Ooh,
35%.
that's not bad.
It is not bad. Now, it's a short-term loan. It's a one-year deal. But how many deals can you do that would help somebody out, are short-term, and pay you that kind of cash secured by the property?
Right.
So, and
Without going to
usually
jail, right?
without going to jail. Exactly. And a lot of those you can probably put together by getting to know the local landlords that's going to your local RIA organization, or maybe being on a Facebook group. Or it used to be, when pre-COVID, we could go to Meetups.
Right. It's all online now. At least people try to, right?
Right. But that is one way of doing it. I know I've told a few people about that, and they're like, what? Where do I get started? Yeah, well, it takes some work.
Even with 35%, that's a great deal for, the landlord and the property owner
It
too.
is.
Because it's getting them out of a bad situation. And, rentals are great. They have that equity in the property. It's just a short-term, solution. And, and it helps them keep on moving. They gladly would pay 35% than lose the property or what have you, right? So
Right. And it could be somebody who's taken, like you said, you were originally from Ohio. I know there are a lot of properties there that people have bought. Let's say you had a house you had and you were using as a rental, and somebody moved out and it's empty, and you got to go in and fix it up. Do a deal like that with somebody to get that money to go put in the new floor, the dishwasher, the paint, or haul out garbage, or whatever it is you got to do to fix that place up to make it better. And then, you got to pay it back at the end. But if you're selling the house, especially, you're going to have that. So And since the market's been kind of hot, yeah, it can be a great deal.
I got you. I got you. So what is your outlook, I guess, on the market? I mean, obviously, we're not professional market predictors, maybe possibly,
Yeah.
but I've definitely been kind of like, still doing some deals, but you also kind of see how expensive everything is, on my side of the business, how expensive the houses are. Kind of
Right.
makes you, yeah, just a little bit more hesitant, right? So
Yeah.
what are your current market predictions? Is it going to be like a crash
I don't
or
think so.
down, or
Yeah.
you don't think so?
I used to think that it was going to crash. I think it might contract a little bit. There might be some back, but so my market is Phoenix, and I'll
Okay,
use that as an example.
sure.
I'm not buying anything in Phoenix right now. It is prices are jacked.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So I'll give you an example. One of the properties that I bought when I first got out of the into the real estate market here in Arizona, and I had taken my meager little savings that were left in my IRA after the stock market fell apart. We bought condos, and one of them, a 2-bedroom condo in Mesa, Arizona, I bought it for $32,000.
Ooh,
It was in great shape. Somebody had put in IKEA cabinets, and there was nice flooring, and they just, the market just fell apart, and it wasn't worth what the guy owed, and he walked. Well, we bought it. I've had that, gosh, since 2009, I think. It's now worth 200,000.
wow.
Yeah, and I've got a renter in there who isn't going to leave because she's got, I mean, I gave her a pretty good deal. Rents for that for a 2-bedroom in Phoenix are now going for like 1,500 or something.
Wow.
It, and I'm charging her 875.
Whoa. So
Right. I
she's
mean, if she moved out, I'd have to do, I had put
redo
new
it.
carpet and paint in beforehand, and I got to redo the bathrooms in there. And she's very quiet, and she is just my kind of renter. For me, I'm still getting like infinity numbers on this because I bought it for so cheap,
Yeah.
and I'm going to let her stay for 875.
Right.
Now, I might have to raise it again next month, but I don't have to. There are HOAs that can go up. There are taxes and insurance, and that can go up. And yep, I'll probably have to do something about that. But I don't want to get so greedy that I'm cutting my nose off to spite my face, and I end up
Sure.
with a tenant in there who can barely make it because I'm charging what the market is saying right now. Now, some people will say, "Well, Nancy, you're an idiot. You're leaving money on the table." Am I? Because if she comes out of there, I've got to lay in a whole bunch more money and get somebody in there that's sketchier than the person. Not that the person who's
Exactly.
in there isn't sketchy. I like that tenant and I want to keep her. Now,
Right. Right.
um, I had thought about, maybe trying to pick up some houses. There are houses that wholesalers are still trying to do business in this market. And there are a couple of niche neighborhoods that I look at constantly. And I think the wholesalers are asking too much, but they got to make a living. And I get that. They're doing all the marketing and front end work. I, I wouldn't be opposed to picking up a house from a wholesaler, but not at these inflated prices. So here's to your question. What I think is going to happen is that I think there's going to be some backtracking. I don't think we're going to be back in 2008 though,
Right.
because here in Phoenix, the jobs market is good. Intel is building another chips factory. They're the only ones that manufacture chips here in the United States, and they're going to town. We have a bunch of electric car manufacturing. There's a lot of jobs here, and those jobs are paying pretty well. And so the employment rate is good. I think that we're kind of at the ceiling though.
Right.
And I am starting to see some houses that are on the market for a little while and the price is backing off. Usually the realtors will say, let's shoot for the moon or whatever, I think, from their pricing. And then if it doesn't sell in a couple of weeks, they start backing it down a little bit. And so I think it will continue to back down a little bit, but I don't think it's going to crash. There are just other things going on too. There is, one of the things that I wanted to mention to anybody listening to this is that there is some legislation right now that could affect the market. The reconciliation bill in Washington, I don't know if you've followed that going on right now, but there is some language in there that is going to really give self-directed IRA investors like me a punch in the gut. And this bill was really designed to keep people like the billionaires from setting up corporations inside their Roth IRA, making a lot of money and not paying on them. In fact, it was modeled after Peter Thiel, who had, like $500. I'm not, the numbers aren't right, but the ratio is,
Right.
he put in like $500 into a Roth IRA, and it was like PayPal or something, and now it's worth billions of dollars, and
Never got taxed.
no, yeah, he does, and you can take that money out whenever and not be taxed. Well, that sticks in the craw of many a legislator and people on the street that are like, hey, why did this happen? So they're kind of going in there and saying, let's not allow people in self-directed IRAs to hold or be a part of more than a 10% ownership in an LLC or a trust.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's going to radically change things.
Radically.
Sure.
So here, I'll give you an example. A lot of the assets that I have bought with my husband, we do 50-50, 50% out of yours, 50% out of mine, because that was equitable. And in some cases, I have an IRA LLC, or we'll have notes go into a personal property trust, because it's just safer for you. If somebody did sue you, then they're less likely to be able to take down all of your retirement money out of there. I mean, I don't want to I'll be 65 in December. And
no way. See,
yeah.
I would have said like 30. Come on, man.
Well, aren't you charming? But yeah. So, but I don't want to get to the point where, because I have stuff in my self-directed IRA, somebody who is in one of my rentals has a dog who bites somebody and they sue me and having nothing to do with it. They're like, oh, she's got deep pockets.
Right.
Let's go raid her IRA. And that can happen.
Sure.
So
sure.
I'm going to have to do something about that, depending on if this passes. Right. So for anybody interested, John Hyre, the HYRE, he's a lawyer in the industry of the notes business, and he's got a website called handsoffmyira.com with all of the information on it, who to write to, what the language is, and how it will affect your IRA, your self-directed IRA. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that and contact their legislators. So that, I think, back to your question, I think could affect the market. One of the reasons it would affect the market is there are a lot of people who have invested in their IRA into some real estate funds. So let's say there's somebody who has started a fund and it's private, it's not traded on the stock market, but you can create these things using SEC rules. And you bring in a bunch of investors from self-directed IRAs. Either they're accredited or non-accredited investors. And usually these things sunset after about 5 years. You put in we'll say $100,000, and in 5 years you get your money back, and you get a certain percentage, and it's secured by whatever real estate they bought. Maybe it's an apartment building or something like that.
Right.
In the case of this legislation, it would force them to sell or to refinance, get people out of that investment vehicle within 2 years, because the language in there would have us sunset these things in 2023. So
that's incredible. So
yeah.
People would almost have to do what's that called, where they take their money out, and then it would still be, they would have to invest it in a property, really, right? I mean, or would you be able to do, is it 1031 exchange or not? Yeah, right.
Not if you're like an investor of a percentage of something. I don't.
Well, right, with the fund, yeah, that wouldn't work.
But I'm not an attorney.
Right, this
Or
is not legal advice for
right,
anyone
right.
listening.
But I do wonder. It also takes apart trusts in there. But anyway, back to that. What happens is, if that happens, we have 2 years until 2023 when all this money is going to be bleeding out of these investments, and those people will have to go that are running the funds will have to refinance or find that money elsewhere.
Right.
That's going to put pressure on the market. Now, I don't know how big the numbers are, but I don't see how it could not affect the market and make some craziness go on.
Sure.
So I would watch out for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see what happens. Hopefully they come to a more sensible, I guess, agreement on it, and that people don't have to rush out in 2 years and,
Hope
make
not.
massive shifts. But
I think
yeah,
there's
that's definitely something to be. I had heard about it, but I didn't read into it too much. But I'm definitely going to go check that out after this call.
Yeah, and it might see you have people investing in your notes that you're creating, and I don't know if you use self-directed IRA investors at all. I mean, that's a great market to get people in. I'd be interested in, looking at any of your stuff. And
Right.
right.
I sell
But
it 100% to UPB right now, so I don't
yeah.
know.
Well,
Just because I can.
yeah. I mean, there's a guy. Do you know Bob Zachmeyer?
I've heard of them.
Okay, so Bob is in Tucson, not too far from us, and
Okay.
he has a great model. I've seen some people do this where he does like take a house, and he's in real estate business too, so he finds a lot of them that way. They'll buy them, but he'll put together the financing on it. I'll just use a round number. So you buy the house for 100, and you sell it to somebody for 150, and you carve out 80% of that to finance, as long as that covers the 100 that you put into it. You bring in an investor there because the loan to value then is 150. He'll hold the second on it, which can be pretty good if it's Bob, because then he's going to make good on it.
Sure.
He'll figure it out, and then usually he finds people to buy the house who are maybe not going to be looked at by the banks as a good investor, but they have cash to bring to the table. So it's all about that risk. When you're a note buyer, you want to reduce the risk as much as possible. So the Bob Zachmeyer deal is the 80-20 thing. And there's other ways of doing that. Like having 100% loan on something and then selling a partial, and then you sort of spread your risk around the same way. And that partial that you sell on that 100% loan is kind of like the 80-20 deal, only that partial is still part of the first, if that makes sense to you. Instead of having a first and second. Yeah, you could really get into the weeds.
You can really, yeah.
But it's just, there's just so many creative things that you could do in notes to make a deal work for somebody. And that's what I really enjoy about it.
Yeah. Well, it's a win-win-win, just like I was talking with a guy who wanted to possibly go in a couple deals with me, to just, passive investment, be a private lender. I was offering him, I always offer 12%, return. And, but
that's why you get those par deals.
What's that?
That's why you get those par deals when you're selling it at full percentage.
Right. Well, I wasn't selling it. It was just, we're going to go buy the house. I was going to create the note. Right.
Gotcha.
So, but just offer him 12% on what we were buying the house for. But even still, just hedging it, I said, well, I'll put, 10,000 in. So you're at 80%, you'll have the first lien on the property. And then, we'll just go from there. But yeah, I mean, there's so much information out there, so you can be so creative with that. But I'll have to look into that Bob Zachmeyer. That sounds like a unique way of doing things. I've never done one like that. So
yeah, he does an annual workshop. I don't know if he did it this year. I think usually it's in October, so I don't know if it's happened yet already. And again, because of COVID, I haven't gone to a lot of these things.
Sure.
But even though I'm vaccinated, but I'll just be so glad when this thing goes away. We can
Right.
go
I
all
think everybody will be, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, yeah, yeah. It really has changed. The meetup. I think culture. I think that was a big thing that I kind of miss doing too. Is the meetups and just being able to have that face to face conversation. But I've noticed people are a lot more comfortable jumping on the phone. Even just doing something like this, just doing over the Skype or Zoom meeting.
Absolutely.
Just to get that just so you can talk to people, right? So that's always kind of nice too. I think it
It
brings people
is.
who are further away closer together in a lot of ways. So.
Yep,
Um,
yep. It
a lot of
sure has
opportunity
been.
there too, right? So,
Well, and I wanted to say too about markets. And when we first started talking, and you said you were in Louisville, and that was a market I'm looking at that I think is really strong. Um, so again, the Midwest market, I think there's still lots and lots of opportunities there. Um,
sure.
we have notes in Oklahoma. I've got stuff in Alabama. There's some states I won't really buy in, and that might change later. But a lot of the East Coast states, just because the foreclosure laws are so difficult, and
Yes.
yeah,
I
and
was just reading. I was just reading about somebody in Long Island. I think the guy lived in the house for 22 years, and it's just bankruptcy after bankruptcy. It was
oh
like
my
some
gosh,
weird law where you can file bankruptcy and then they can't, evict you. But he held out for 22 years, and he had a really
wow.
good lawyer, and he just they couldn't do anything. I mean, and
So
Long Island, property's probably worth $400,000, $500,000. So
sure.
you can imagine how if you were that note owner, how mad you'd be.
Oh,
Hopefully,
I'd be
it wouldn't,
mad.
but
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that is a big thing too. I think you need to look into is what you can actually redevelop the note on. I personally do like Illinois and Indiana are the two main markets that I do. Even though I live in Kentucky, and even still with Illinois, you got to be a little careful because
You
they,
do. I see. I grew up in Illinois, born in Cook County, and I'd like to buy there, but I'm the friends of mine that are still there. A lot of them are not. Are leaving. I have
yeah,
one friend that she would love to sell her house and can't because nobody will buy it because the taxes are so confiscatory that you know they're just not gonna. It's not gonna happen, especially if you're in a higher level market. It's
right.
difficult. But in the city, I think, and south side of Chicago, there's opportunities. It is a little scary because I don't know, were you buying in the city or
No, 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 no,
yeah,
no. Yeah, yeah. I mean, most of the houses I'm buying are blue collar towns like
yeah.
Illinois. I mean, I'm not trying to diss your state, but it's like
No, no, I
Chicago, which
understand.
is amazing. I love visiting Chicago, and then the rest of it's just like corn country, right? It's all
It is.
farmland. So
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah.
buying all those like little farm towns and stuff like that.
I love that, and that's one of the things that I have gotten into actually is little towns.
Okay,
It is a double-edged sword though, because there's just a smaller market of people to sell to. But you get to know somebody at the local church or something like that. There's always somebody new that needs a house, or some kid's leaving home
sure.
and he wants to put up his own, have his own doormat. And I think, my husband, he and I both grew up in Illinois, but he has lived we didn't get married until 20 years after high school. He is my high school sweetheart and found me years later. So,
Oh, that's
um,
amazing.
yeah, yeah, we have a interesting story there. But
Yeah, for sure.
so in the meantime, in those 20 years that he was living elsewhere, and I had no idea where he was living in a little town. And and I was living in a little town. And so I have an affinity for that. I think there's a lot you can get done there.
Well,
There's
the
just
the the biggest thing that I've found is the competition. There is no competition, right? There are
right.
no investors there. So, and it's like hilarious sometimes when I'm talking to the realtor with the listing and they try to like, oversell it and like give me all this breakdown like I'm going to live there, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the 20th deal I looked at this week. Like, I don't need all the 50 printouts and all this stuff. Just, I'm just going to look at the property real quick and we'll be on my way, but yeah, it's just like that.
Yeah.
There's no investors there. So you can really get a good price on the property. And yeah, maybe it does take a little longer to originate the note, but with seller financing is so hot right now, it's usually quite quick. I mean, I'm usually able to originate a note in about 60 days. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not bad at all. So,
That's really good. Yeah.
yeah.
Especially if you're bringing in an outside investor and putting
Right.
it together, that works really well.
Right.
So marketing, is it, you touched on that a little bit because you're talking to realtors, and is that primarily how you are finding your deals, the houses that you want to buy and
So,
making a note?
honestly, I'm just looking through Zillow. Like I said, I'm in the Midwest, so I'm looking through, I will look in Tennessee. Tennessee is really expensive right now. But
Yeah.
Indiana, Illinois, whatever within driving distance, because I always want to drive out and view the property.
Mhm.
But I'll call the realtor up and I'll just give me the rundown. I can run comps and I can look at the pictures and I can kind of see, is the property livable? That's the biggest thing. Is the property livable or close to livable?
So
Um,
you don't want to do like major rehabs or,
No,
yeah.
no, never, never. Because I mean, especially, if I'm buying something, it's still 5 hours away from me. So trying to get a rehab out there, and plus in a little town, it's harder to find rehabbers. There's only one guy
Yeah.
who does that type of thing, so it's kind of difficult. So it's got to be close to livable. Maybe a little bit of work to where someone who's going to buy that can actually put some work into it and build equity in it too, right?
Mhm.
So, it's got to be livable. And then they just go through the rundown, like, roof is however old, and, foundation's good, stuff like that. And then, of course, like, I'll put an offer on it. And if the offer gets accepted, I'll go out and view the property with the 7-day inspection contingency. And if we're good to
Mhm.
go, we're good to go. The numbers work. So
That's
yeah, most
great.
of it's done remote. I don't go out and view the property until I have an offer accepted. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, there's so much you can get online, and somebody can give you a video tour and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
you
yeah,
can pretty much see. And after you've looked at a few houses, you kind of know,
yeah, yeah. After
there are
you,
clues there.
yeah. Exactly. I used to work for a wholesaler when I lived in Cleveland, and that was a huge, huge benefit for me. He would have me go tour the properties. So, after you've been through, 50 houses, like it just starts to click. Like your brain just starts to know, like, oh, this
Yeah.
is an issue, that's not an issue, it knows to what to look for. So, that was always a huge, huge benefit for me.
So I'm curious as to what your goal is then, long term. Do you want to get to the point where this continues just to be a sideline and you're building up money to live on, or
Yeah,
retirement,
no,
or
no, no, for sure. I mean, for like we talked about earlier, note investing is a huge, huge passive thing, and I think everybody kind of wants to get to that spot where, their passive income kind of, overcomes their original or their regular income,
yeah,
everything like that. But, I take it day by day. There's a lot of people who go out there and they try to be so aggressive, and I could buy maybe two or three more like by the end of the year, but I'm going to hold back. I'm going to wait because you don't want to be over leveraged.
exactly.
And you don't want to get into the same thing with the predatory lending, like I was
Right.
talking about, it has to be a good fit. So I could always get more for my properties. Sometimes I'll sell something for, 50,000 and maybe I can get it, 60 or 70, but that's not what I really want to get into. And especially, it's tough too because it's a long-term investment because when I sell a note, I'm subject to capital gains tax, right? So that you're
Right.
talking about 40, 50%. So you don't want that. So a lot of times, I'm looking to keep the note and have that passive income. But yeah, so I'd say, long term, I just, keep growing my portfolio and keep doing what I'm doing. And it's always good to have that extra side business going, and eventually I think it'll outgrow my regular job, and then I'll have to see what I'll do from there, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good attitude, because I do think that there's a lot of people that jump into it and they give themselves a timeline and say, I want to be out, I want to quit my job in a year or two or whatever and make six figures. And um, I I've seen people make bad decisions that way.
Yeah,
So slow and steady is probably smarter in this, the
yeah, and
vineyard
that's
thing.
right, and that's real estate investing in general. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
trying to do it to get out of your job, I don't think you should be doing it. Me personally, like, I mean, work is work. Like it's still, even with the note investing, it's a lot of work. It's not all,
Yes.
it's not all, sunshine and roses,
Yeah.
For me, I personally love my job and everything like that, but, I also love note investing. So let's just do both, right?
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's still a lot of work. It's still a process and you have to have that patience, so I think that's my biggest thing. I think,
You mentioned something too that is an opportunity, I think, coming up in that capital gains taxes, for instance, when you have a property and the owner owns it outright and they want to sell it, maybe it's somebody who's a landlord and they want to sell it. I think the opportunity right now, because taxes are on the table for going up, is to say, look, if you want, I can set you up so that your capital gains are taken over a long period of time. Um, Rather than having to take a lump sum, let's spread this out so you're not paying that high capital gains. And that's what happens when you do seller financing. So, and
right,
somebody who does the note business can go in there and set that up for the seller the way that's going to work for the seller. And if they come back at you after 5 years and say, I want all my money out, well, then you just find, you either buy out
find a
the
note
note
buyer.
entirely, you bring in another investor or something, and you get the guy out, or you pay him a partial payment, whatever works. But I do think that that's a potential opportunity, especially, there's people that, I told you I'm going to be 65 this next birthday, egad, but there it is. And there are people still older than me that are like, I'm tired and I want to get out of this business. When you get to be 75, 80, stuff slows down and you don't want to
Right.
deal with it. My mom passed away this year. She was 90,
Sorry.
and thanks. But you know what? In a way, I celebrate the fact that she got to that point, and yay
Yeah,
rah,
that's a
if I
long
could do
time.
that. But the last 10 years, I'm looking at her and thinking about myself and going, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to handle the business
Right,
at that
right.
age, and I'm going to want to sell my property. So that is a market for people to help that person out, especially the kids of the people, like somebody my age who was taking care of mom or dealing with stuff, and saying, look, why don't we get her or him or whoever it is out of that deal, get you that money or payments to live on, especially if somebody has to go move out and go to a assisted living or something. I'll give you an example. My mom lived in California when I lived in California, and she had a house and was really declining. Had a stroke. We moved her out, and the market was just in tatters at that time. And I wrapped the note. I sold it and wrapped it. That note still is active today, and we wrote it on a note deal that added, in that market in California, 2% was about as high as we can go. Other places you can go higher, but we wrote an extra 2% on whatever that underlying mortgage was that my mom had.
Right.
The mortgage would go to 2%. Guy that bought it, that worked for him because he couldn't go into a bank and get financing. It was a really nice house, and he still lives there. And he could refinance. I think he would like to, but he's not paying a huge amount in interest rate, honestly. But it's interesting. So when you do that with a note, you're creating money on stuff you don't own. So, that was for my mom. That was an extra $450 a month in income for her.
That's
And
huge.
which is, can make a difference, especially for somebody that's, living on a fixed income and their world is getting smaller and smaller.
Right, right.
Um, and at this point now she's left that to me and my sister. And, it's not a ton of money, but I split it up and I'm happy to send it to my sisters. And
Yeah.
someday the borrower on that, on the wrap note, will get around to refinancing it. And then there's a little extra in there too that my mom got to leave behind. So,
Yeah.
wrapping a deal is an awesome thing.
Yeah. So, that's another thing too, is kind of, you talked about a lot of people who get older and they have the rental properties. I know somebody who had like 12 rental properties, and it was a couple, and they were, reaching about in 70, and they wanted to sell, but it's the same thing. I mean, you sell a portfolio of 12 properties, it's like, whoa, watch out, right? With
Right.
the taxes, and they saw that. So they got connected with a note investor, and they were able to do just like you said, and be able to sell them on that seller finance to have that kind of passive income. And also because they're used to it. They're not used to having a lump sum of cash. If you own rental
Right.
properties for 20 years, you're used to having checks come in, right? So
Right.
so yeah, that is a great opportunity, like you said.
It is. I mean, it can get a little dicier once, the people have passed away, and then it goes to their heirs, and the heirs are like, give me my money.
I want to get my
And
money, right? Yeah,
yeah.
the young
And then
people.
you're like, okay, well, let's work on this. And either you work it out with them and you give them the cash flows, or you bring in another investor and buy it out.
Right, right.
But yeah, I think it's a real good market, and actually something I need to push harder on.
I got you. So last question. I'll save the best for last. All right.
Okay.
What is the best deal you've ever done in relation to note investing?
In
Best deal
relation
you've
to
ever
note
done.
investing. It might well be that rental that I told you about, that we bought the condo, and that wasn't the only one. We bought several of them under $40,000 and rented them out, and those have gained in value, and so they weren't notes actually, but because of the increase in the value and the increase in rents, they are, a hedge against inflation.
Right, right.
Those have been honestly a great deal, but they do come with it some landlord issues. Like, nobody calls me in the middle of the night saying my toilet's plugged. I have gotten a 10 p.m. call saying the water's running and I can't turn it off. And
Yeah.
that's so not fun, but it
Right.
happens occasionally. So those, eventually I'll probably have to turn them over to somebody to manage. But at this point, those things have all paid off, and they're an infinity investment. So when you can get your investment to infinity, like you've gotten all your money out of it. I have another one. I don't know if this one is the best deal. It's hard to say which one. I had one that we bought that was super cheap, and we sold it to another investor on a note. And again, this note is performing every month, going into my self-directed IRA, and I am totally out of any money that I've invested into it. We've gotten all the money out, and it just keeps performing, and it should perform for another 10 or 15 years unless they pay it off.
Wow.
So those are the sweet deals. I think if you can get a property, own it outright at some point, maybe it's you paid it off or whatever, and then turn around and finance that for somebody else, get to the point where you've gotten all your money out, that's an excellent deal to go with, if you can do it.
That sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, Nancy, it was an honor as well as a pleasure to have you on this evening. I really appreciate you joining me, and I got a lot of value out of it. I'm sure anyone who's going to listen to this is going to as well. And I wish you the best of luck with your retirement and your
Thank you.
continued success with real estate. Yeah, it's got to be fun. So
Yeah.
so that's awesome. But
Yeah. So if anybody has a question for me, or has a deal they're like not wondering what they might do with it, I'm always happy to talk. You can reach me at nconrad@vineyardfund.com. You can look at my website, vineyardfund.com. Although honestly, I really need to update it. I haven't, because I'm not really selling anything to the public. It's just kind of our calling card, but you can find me there. But it was
There
great
you go.
talking to you, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Yep, you have a good night, and stay warm there down in Arizona,
Oh, we
right?
will. Yeah. So, all right. Thanks
Have
again.
a good night.
You too. Bye.